What's up, Coldwater Nation? Welcome back to the channel. You're watching Empire Coldwater. So, the last week or so has not really been that great as far as catching fish for me or Jeff. So, there isn't really that much to show you. But, in lieu of that, we had something else in mind. And today, I'm going to do a tying video because, you know, me and Jeff tie a lot of what we use. And we're going to start it off easy today. I'm going to show you two different ties for something that me and Jeff use actually quite a lot when the bite starts to turn off, and this usually gets us going again, and that is the good old woolly bugger. So today I'm going to show you one that's pretty simple and pretty easy that, you know, anybody could really tie and be successful with it. And I'm going to show you another one that has a little bit extra flair if you're up for the challenge, and feel free to tie any of these you want to if you think they're going to work for you. But I hope you like what I put together for you today. It's not super complicated, but I hope it's something that you like. And if you like fly tying videos, you want to see more of the patterns that we use in the future, then let us know and we'll get on that. So without further hesitation, let's get to tying.
Fish! Nope. You didn't get very far, did you? Is it brown? Yeah, there you go, buddy. See you later, bud. No way. Woo! Come on.
He's tired now. Yeah!
Look at that toad.
What's up, guys? My name's Bryon,
And I'm Jeff.
and you're watching Empire Coldwater. Let's rip some lips.
This video is brought to you in part by Upstate Excursions and Black Dog Outdoor Sports.
Alright, so as we get into the first one here, we have a size 10 nymph down eye hook with a 5/32 brass bead. And all we're going to do to start with is we got our black thread, and we're just going to wrap all the way down the hook to get the thread nice and set. So you're taking the bigger motions here as soon as I get to the hook to not do that. Try not to do that. And once we've gotten to the barb of the hook, we're going to stop, and we're going to snip the tag end of the thread and discard that. So the next thing that we're going to use is we're going to use some medium-sized black marabou feathers, and we're going to take a pretty decent grouping of them, which is what I'm doing behind the camera right now. Making sure to pull out all the fuzz and any extra strands so that they don't get in the way. And we're just going to compress those into a nice little group. And once we have those in a nice little grouping, what we're going to do is we're going to put them on top of the hook shank, leaving about the length of the hook behind it as our tail. Got some extra fuzzies there, you got to get those out of the way. Can't tie those in. So like I said, about a length of the hook back as the tail, and we're going to do a number of very tight, very deliberately placed wraps here to set that tail in place and make sure it doesn't move. You can see the marabou fighting with me a little bit, and it usually does. The marabou is not something super easy to tie on, but once you get it there, you get your couple of nice tight wrappings, and it should be secured in place just fine. The next thing here that's going to happen is I'm going to come in with the scissors. Once I get those wraps thoroughly in place, I'm going to come in with the scissors and we're going to snip off most of what's on top so that it's a little bit easier to work with, and sliding the bead back to the front to keep it in place. Going to do as best as we can, wrap over what's left there to create the underbody of our fly. You can see some of it gets away, and that's okay because we're going to put stuff over it. You just want to make sure that it's not sticking up super bad, and we're going to wrap all the way down to the bead, and then we're going to wrap back over it just to make sure we get all the threads down that we can. And we're going to stop right there at that hook point to finish and clean up our marabou a little bit. So you're cutting that long piece off. So the next thing that we're going to grab is going to be some black ice chenille for the marabous, or I'm sorry, for the woolly buggers rather. And we're going to take a pretty decently long length of that so that it's easy to work with. For this, I ended up using it for both flies, so I took a section that was probably 4 to 6 inches long. And all we're going to do with that chenille is going to be super easy. After we get it cut to length and we have it put back to where we can get it, we're going to take it, we're going to wrap forward a little bit, and we are going to secure. Nope, we're getting stuck there. That's okay. It happens. We are going to wrap in the chenille right next to the tail, and then we're going to wrap over it, compressing it all the way down to the hook shank as uniformly as we can to create a nice bed for what comes next. And now we're just going to go and wrap pretty much all the way down to the bead. And what we're going to do now is we're going to counter wrap the chenille in closed loops. So we're not leaving space between them. We're just wrapping them very carefully next to each other as if you would a spring, make it look like a spring. And we're just going to do that all the way forward until we reach the bead. And what this chenille does is it adds definition to the body of the fly, and also because of the type of wrapping that we're doing here, it's adding definition to what would be body segments. Go all the way up, right behind the bead. And now all we're going to do is we're going to hold it taut, and you're going to wrap 2 to 3 very tight, very purposeful wraps right where the chenille meets the head to make sure that it's secured in place. And then we're going to come in, and as close as you can to where you tied in without cutting your thread, we're going to snip off the chenille, finishing the body of the fly. And there is one more component to this fly in particular. So we are going to hard wrap, we're going to put a thread dam, hard wrap behind the bead to keep the bead in place, and also to create a very small window right there between the body and the head. Because for the woolly buggers that me and Jeff use, most of them have what is called a hot spot, which is a very bright pop of color in an otherwise usually monotone fly that makes it pop out in the water and will catch the attention of any fish that are nearby. And for this hot spot in particular, we are going to be using some orange ice dubbing, which will be very bright and very persistent in the water. What is important to keep in mind here is that ice dubbing is a little bit more difficult to work with than normal dubbing. So you can see I am applying a wax to my line here to make it easier for me to create the dubbing noodle, because ice dubbing is more larger fibers than any other type of dubbing that you would have, so it's a lot harder to get it to stay in one place. But once we get that dubbing noodle, we are just going to tightly wrap around our head of the fly there. And it's okay if you need to adjust it, you can pull it tighter if you need to, but we're just going to do a couple wraps up there to get ourselves a nice hot spot. And you can see I put too much dubbing on, which is fine. We're just going to pull it away and continue wrapping to make sure that we have everything tight and cinched down and in place It's okay if it looks a little fuzzy and sloppy like this because we're going to clean it up. That's what happens with ice dubbing. You see we come in here, cut the excess off, clean it up a little bit, because the ice dubbing is a little unruly compared to a standard dubbing. Just pulling out any loose fibers to make it look a little bit nicer. You see it went from not looking that great to actually looking pretty decent, and that really is the fly. So we're just going to wrap a couple of times right behind the head there to make sure everything's tight and secure. And then all we're going to do is we're going to whip finish. Nope, got stuck there. We're just going to whip finish. And that is the fly. So we are push it back over the top of the thread so that it covers everything up, cut the thread off. And then all that's left to do, which is something that me and Jeff do with all our flies, is we are going to apply a small amount of head cement just to make sure that everything stays nice and tight even after we finish the knot so it doesn't come out. This applicator is a brush applicator, so it's really nice to get into all the little nooks and crannies with it. So that's the fly. All we're going to do here is we're going to come in with the scissors after we've applied the cement. We're just going to cut up or trim off any loose fibers that we see, and then that is the fly. That is a very simple, very effective woolly bugger that will probably work for anything that you could ask it for. All that's left to do now is put it in the box. So we've got a nice empty side of our box here where I am going to place the first fly inside it, being our simple woolly bugger. And there we go. First fly in the box. One down, one to go for the video. Alright, and now we're on to fly number 2. This is going to be similar in design, but a little bit more complicated. We're starting with the same size 10 nymph down eye hook with the 5/32 speed. But this time we are going to add a little something more to make this fly more effective under the surface of the water. And so what we're going to add right behind the bead head is going to be this lead-free underwire. And for this we're going to cut a pretty decent workable section off, and all we're going to do is to start the wire, we are going to just pin it down with one of your fingers and wrap it on. And right now it's okay if the wraps are kind of loose. We're just trying to get it on in place, and then we can compress it down. As far as how far the length of this should be, I usually like a length of about 1/3 of the hook shank, and these nymph down eye hooks are pretty easy to measure that because you can see there is a section of the hook that is actually slanted down compared to the rest. So once it's about that length, I am just going to cut off the tag from one or both ends of the wire depending on how long it is and how good the wrap is. And you know, from there I think we're cutting both tags. And from there you can see we have those two sections on the side sticking up, and all that we're going to do is we're going to take our tweezers or whatever kind of instrument that you have, and we're just going to push those down so that they are flush with the rest of the wire, so that they're not sticking up, and so that we don't get our string, or thread, I should say, stuck on that wire and have it be cut off. So you can see there was an uneven section in the wrap there, so I just pulled it out, and now we're wrapping it back down before we pin it. And what this wire is going to do is it's not only going to add definition to the body, but it's also going to make the fly a little bit heavier, so it's going to sink better. So now when we start wrapping, rather than from right behind the head of the fly, we're going to start from behind the underwire. And we're going to do some nice uniform wraps from the back of the underwire all the way until the bend of the hook starts. And we're going to leave it there, right there with the barb of the hook. However, this time, rather than cut the tag end of the thread off, what we are actually going to do is we are going to clamp it to keep it taut, and we're going to save it for later because we are going to be using it later. So apart from that, we're just going to start like we did last time, and we're going to be taking a decent clump of that black marabou with a length for a tail just about equal to the length of the hook shank, and we are going to secure that in place with a number of very deliberate, hard wraps without breaking our thread. So this will make it so that it will stay in place, but also you have the ability to adjust it if you need to. Then all we're going to do is we're just going to attempt to wrap as best we can forward a little bit before cutting off any excess in front of the underwire. And like before, it's okay if this is a little bit messy because we're going to wrap over it. We just want to get everything as pressed down as the hook shank as we can, which can include trimming as much as you see fit to without cutting your thread. So now we're just going to make sure that as much of this is pinned down as we can possibly get. And we are going to wrap up into the wire. This, because of the spiral, it will take you all the way to the head of the fly, but make sure that you come back just a little bit so that you leave room in front of our wrappings, because you guessed it, like last time, there's going to be a hot spot there. So it's good to see where that gap is, because that's where your hot spot's going to be, is in that gap. But we're going to add a little bit extra flair to this one, so for the time being, we're going to make sure that where we position our thread is going to be at the point of the hook. And what we are going to add in now is we're going to add two things. We are going to tie them in at the back, and then they're going to be worked forward. So the first thing that we are going to add to the back here is we are going to add a UTC gold wire that is in size medium, and we are also going to be tying in a small hackle feather. So what will go first? The wire will go first, because the wire is heavier and it'll be easier to work with. So we're going to cut off a working section of that wire, and when I say working section, I usually am referring to a length that is between 3 and 4 inches, just because it's a fly. And we are going to tie that in at the back, and we are going to wrap back to the base of our tail and then back forward to the hook point where we started. Now we are going to do the same exact thing for this small to medium sized hackle feather, back to the tail and then back to where we were before we wrap forward again. We are going to be wrapping forward until we reach the point where we were before, about a bead's length behind the head of our fly, where the hot spot's going to be. So now we are once again going to be introducing the same chenille as we used last time, the black ice woolly bugger chenille, with a bit of a twist this time. So rather than introduce the chenille at the back of our fly like we did before, we can't, because we already have the wire and the hackle feather back there. So what we are going to do is we are going to come right up close and personal with the head of our fly, and we're going to wrap it in at the front, leaving that little bit of room there for our hot spot. And now we are going to wrap the chenille in closed wrappings back until we reach the tail of our fly, making sure to keep those wraps nice and tight. And then once we reach the back of the fly, here's where that tag end that we saved comes in. We are now going to use that tag end to tie in and finish tying in our chenille. So we are going to take 2 to 3 nice tight wraps back where the chenille is to keep it in place, before in a nice open spiral, making sure not to disturb too much of the chenille. We are then going to wrap the tag end back to the front of the fly until we reach the head, and we're going to pull it taut, and then we are going to take our main end of our thread and we are going to tie off our tag. And to some this may seem needlessly complicated, but this is how it is done when we have more than one component going at once on either end of the fly. So you can see we just cut our tag end there after having used it to tie in a component, and that's all we got to do. It'll stay and it'll be fine, and then we, as close as we can to our fly, we are going to cut off the base of our chenille, just like that. And don't worry if it's sticking up a little bit, it will get pressed down by the wire. And speaking of the wire, that's what we're going to wrap in next. So the wire we are going to counter wrap in nice open spirals heading towards the front of the fly. And what this wire does is it adds to the segmentation of the body that would usually be done by the chenille alone. So we're just going to wrap this in open spirals to the front of the fly, and then we are going to wrap our wire very tightly, might I add. You have to do this tightly or the wire will not helicopter. And you can see that I'm having issues with this because I did not tie it in as tightly as I needed to. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure I have control by bringing it all the way up, and I am just going to tightly and firmly put this wire into place to make sure that it is not going to go anywhere. But this wire just didn't want to cooperate, it didn't want to helicopter, and I didn't want to push it because I didn't want it to ruin the segmentation that I already had with it. So I decided it would just be better to come in and cut it, and then we could just push it down and wrap it in. Sometimes this happens, and that's okay. So next we are going to do almost the exact same thing with our hackle feather here. We are going to open spiral this towards the front of the fly, but we are going to do it in the opposite spaces as the wire. We do not want this to cover the wire because then what we did was pretty much for nothing. So we're going to take this all the way up to the head, and yes, it's okay that these spirals go all the way to the head of the fly because they will either be snipped and cut off later, or they will be wrapped over. So it's okay. We take 2 to 3 nice solid wraps at the head of the fly, maybe add a few more just to feel better about it, and we're going to cut this off as close as we can, just like that. So you can see doing this, it adds a little bit more definition to the fly, and you have an extra pop of color in there with the white as opposed to only having one that you would just have with the hotspot. So now we are just going to whip this off because that's it for the black thread. Oh, we can see the thread broke. That's my fault. It's okay. This does happen from time to time, which is why I left it in. All we're going to do is we're going to rewrap the thread to make sure that we catch that in that break. And once we're sure that we've caught that break, we're going to cut off our new tag as well as the broken end. So it's okay. This happens from time to time. That's why I left it in here. It's easily fixable, so don't panic if it happens. Now we are just going to properly whip finish our fly. Before we come in and trim the thread off. But before we trim it off, we are going to be adding our head cement. Just because we had that break, I do not want to cut the tag and have it all unravel on me, so I'm going to put the cement on first, and then I'm going to come in with the scissors and I'm going to cut this off. So you may notice that we have most of this done, but there isn't a hot spot yet. And there isn't a hot spot because we are not going to be using dubbing to make a hot spot. We're going to use a thread dam to make our hot spot, to make it a little more clean. But what we're going to be doing that with is a different color thread. So what is happening right now is I am changing the thread on my bobbin before we start on the hot spot, which is super easy. It's pretty much wrapping a thread dam, so it's not something that you should worry about that much. The only thing that is being introduced here is switching your threads mid-fly. Now, what you're going to see me do here real quick is, like I said before, it's okay that this came all the way up to the front of the fly. And that's because I knew I was either going to wrap over it or I was going to trim it off. And what I decided ultimately was to trim it off, because it would have been easier to wrap over trimming it. So now I've chosen a red thread for our hotspot, and all I'm going to do is wrap that in. And I'm going to wrap it back to the point where I would like the hotspot to be. And I'm just going to keep going. And you keep going and keep going and keep going until we get a nice thread dam built up, which will do twofold. It will keep the head in place, and it will also pin down any of the fibers we missed, as well as create a nice pop of color in the front of the fly. So you can see I am pushing back as many of these fibers as I can to make sure I get the ones that are sticking up behind the head of the fly, because those don't need to be there. That was just where we tied it in. And at the point where I am happy with the hotspot, all I'm going to do is, with the new thread, I'm going to come in, I'm going to whip it again. Get a good whip finish in, make sure it's nice and tight. and that's the hot spot. It's a little bit different from dubbing, but it's the same basic concept. We're just going to snip this off, make sure everything's nice and good, and then just like with everything else, we are going to come in and we are going to apply head cement to make sure that this stays in place. I know we put cement on before, but that was for the tie. This is to make sure that the hot spot doesn't come undone, as it is an independent piece to the rest of the fly at this point. So that's this one. We're just gonna come in here, we're gonna trim up anything else that needs to be trimmed off, and that's gonna be our woolly bugger. That's a little bit more complicated than the other one. All that's left to do now is put it in the box. So here we are. We already have our first one in the box, and now we get a nice look at this one. We've got that extra definition with the hackle feather, which I think actually turned out all right. So we're gonna stick it right in here next to that one, and that's gonna be it. I hope you guys liked this. And if there's anything else you want to see and you like the fly tying videos, be sure to let us know, because I'm totally down with tying more of these. We hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you like what you saw today, consider giving this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more.
Thanks for hanging out with us, and we'll see you next time.
Until then, tight lines, everybody.